we have 2 Indigenous candidates as MLAs in this province. That is huge.
The United Conservatives win a majority, but there are 2 rookie NDP winners.
How do we protect against people claiming indigeneity?
Youth to Senate. We need a say in reconciliation.
I specifically felt more drawn towards, what Kawana stands for, protecting her land and advocating our Indigenous rights.
And an Athabaskan artist is recognized by another Indigenous powerhouse. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Savannah Kelly. APTN News has obtained a confidential memorandum and report from the Assembly of First Nations National Chief's Office. They have been verified by the National Chief's Office as Roseanne Archibald's response to a summary report on the third-party investigation into allegations she engaged in harassment and wrongdoing. Leanne Sanders has the report.
The confidential memorandum to the First Nations in Assembly, dated May 29, 2023, includes the National Chief's own summary report of the investigation's findings. That investigation was prepared by Raquel Chisholm of Emond Harnden LLP and delivered to the Chiefs in Assembly on May 18, 2023. It looked into complaints by 5 different people who alleged the National Chief engaged in workplace harassment and created a toxic or poisoned work environment. The summary of the investigative report by Chisholm did not provide details of the allegations or findings for confidentiality purposes, other than to confirm the National Chief's conduct amounted to harassment in 2 of the 5 reports. The investigation also found that Archibald breached the confidentiality of all 5 complainants, as well as reprisal. Quote, "We conclude that by making statements that question the motives, intentions, and integrity of the staff members that have made complaints, and by making that suggestion in a public venue, the respondent's conduct amounts to reprisal." Unquote. In her response, Archibald writes she felt, quote, "compelled to set the record straight." Archibald makes 3 recommendations. The first, asking chiefs to urge their regional chiefs to, quote, "cease using corporate means to usurp the will of the chiefs, the FNIA, and to have peace, healing, and reconciliation within the AFN as a whole. Separate politics from business. Remove the national chief and regional chiefs from the AFN Secretariat Board and replace with an interim board. And complete a fulsome report to examine the active lawsuits, complaints, and exit interviews from former AFN staff with the intent of eliminating toxicity within the AFN Secretariat." Unquote. APTN News has reached out to Chisholm, who says she will not be commenting. Archibald's memo concludes by saying, quote, "It is imperative that chiefs, leadership, demand to see the full HR investigation report to read the facts for themselves. Once the full HR reports are rightfully shared with the First Nations in Assembly, everyone will agree that National Chief has been substantively exonerated." Unquote. The report says the National Chief's legal counsel disputes the findings and says that 93% were found to be unsubstantiated. Her legal counsel is expected to provide full details to chiefs in Assembly before June 28th. The National Chief was not made available for an interview. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Just moments ago, National Chief Roseanne Archibald released a statement calling the ongoing leaks to the media a concern. Archibald says in the release that it is her, quote, "obligation to protect the integrity of the AFN while making sure it is truthful, transparent, and accountable to our communities," unquote. A Roman Catholic priest who worked in 2 Manitoba First Nations is facing 5 charges, including sexual assault and forcible confinement. Manitoba RCMP say the victim is an 8-year-old girl and that additional youths have been identified as potential victims. Kathleen Martins has more.
Manitoba RCMP have announced the arrest of a priest They say Arul Suvari is 48 years old and he was arrested in the northern community of Little Grand Rapids. That's one of 2 First Nations where the priest ministered for the Catholic Church. They say he also worked in Pungasi First Nation in northern Manitoba. They say he faces a number of sex-related charges involving an 8-year-old girl. The girl told police that she was asked to come and help the priest clean the church when he touched her inappropriately. She also said he kept her from leaving the building, although she managed to escape. This happened as well on May 27th. Police say that the girl ran home, told an adult, and the adult called police. They said that's why they held today's news conference. They hoped that more victims would come forward and call their local RCMP detachment if they don't live in these 2 communities. Kathleen Martins, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
There's much more on this story over on our website, aptnnews.ca. The Trudeau government says a legal and safe supply of opioids is needed to prevent deaths, but the Conservatives say Liberal policy is misguided and actually leads to more opioid deaths. On Tuesday, Liberal and Green MPs objected to that, calling on the Conservatives to stop spreading mistruths about the drug policy. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre insists the Liberal safe drug policy is causing more fatal overdoses. On May 18th, he argued in favor of an opposition motion to do away with the policy.
They have died under this Prime Minister as he has flooded the streets with powerful heroin-like drugs that are paid for by tax dollars and have funded a black market for fentanyl and killed so many people.
But at a press conference in Ottawa on Tuesday morning, Liberal MP Adam Van Coverden said what the Conservative leader is alleging is simply not true.
We have to acknowledge that we have an opioid crisis and a poisoned drug crisis in Canada, and the type of rhetoric that's coming from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives right now is doing more harm. It's spreading mistruth, it's creating more stigma, and it's not doing anything to help people who actually need it.
Green Party MP Mike Maurice said the government should be moving more quickly on creating a safe drug supply. The Conservative opposition is scuttling this effort.
The rhetoric from the Conservative Party is eroding this conversation. We ought to be talking about moving further and faster to stop this crisis.
Green Party leader Elizabeth May said Indigenous people living on the street in urban areas such as East Vancouver are disproportionately affected by the toxic drug supply.
When you're completely cut off from support and you don't have a home and you don't have a door to go to close when you go to sleep at night, you're much more vulnerable, which is why, again, speaking to the complexity of this, the housing first principles really matter. Get somebody a secure place to live, and then the mental health supports come around that, and the addiction counseling and the help comes around that.
The Conservative motion against the government's safe drug policy was defeated in the House of Commons on Monday. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A parliamentary committee continued its study of Bill C-29, the proposed creation of a National Council for Reconciliation. Over the past few weeks, witnesses have described the draft bill as flawed. On Tuesday, Indigenous youth had their say. They expressed the need to have a youth voice on the board. The president of the National Inuit Youth Council, Brian Pottle, appeared. He said ensuring youth have a say is essential because they're the fastest growing segment of the Canadian population. He also told committee members the board selection process needs to be safeguarded against identity fraud.
How do we protect against people claiming indigeneity, claiming Indigenous ancestry more or less fraudulently for the gain that comes with that today? Of course, this is a very contemporary problem. One that actually is engendered by such acts as Bill C-29, where there is now a sense of gain to be made from certain aspects of Indigenous opportunity. And so that needs to be reflected as well.
We want to hear what you think about creating a National Council for Reconciliation. Here's how you can continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. We need to step aside for a short break. Coming up, results and reaction to the Alberta election.
We have 2 Indigenous candidates as MLAs in this province. That is huge.
Albertans went to the polls yesterday to decide who governs the province for the next 4 years, and the United Conservative Party won another majority. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to a couple of rookie MLAs at NDP headquarters when all the votes were counted.
Most polls had the United Conservative Party winning yesterday's election, but not all. Some gave the Alberta NDP a chance. And hundreds of supporters were on hand in downtown Edmonton to watch the live results and cheer for their candidates. The NDP swept Edmonton in orange. 2 Cree candidates won their constituencies, Jody Calahoo Stonehouse and Brooks Arcan Paul. Calahoo Stonehouse took Edmonton Rutherford. APTN spoke to her right after she found out she had won.
I am so grateful and appreciative of the ceremonies, the prayers, the love. You know, so many folks came out to volunteer. I am just humbled, thankful, and really excited about the work that lies ahead.
She says she went outside Edmonton to drum up support.
I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Banff, Canmore, spend some time in Morley, really encouraging people to get out and vote. Went up north to Lesser Slave Lake, to Driftpile, to those beautiful nations, you know, and it's exciting to see our people get involved in provincial politics.
Brooks Arkan Paul won in Edmonton West Henday. He found out he had won when he was being interviewed live on CBC.
We have 2 Indigenous candidates as MLAs in this province. That is huge. This is a win for our communities. This will be a strong voice to ensure that every single Albertan, whether they are Indigenous, whether they are queer, whether they are a member of communities that require diversity and inclusion, we will speak with them on their behalf.
He says he will start work immediately.
We will continue fighting every single day to ensure our treaty rights are protected, to ensure our rights as Indigenous folks are protected, and we will make sure that we as the NDP will protect every single Albertan.
But sweeping Edmonton was not enough to beat the UCP. Premier-elect Danielle Smith spoke to her supporters in Calgary.
Now, many folks wrote us off, even just as recently as last month. But you know what happened? Despite it all, today, Albertans chose to move our province forward by re-electing a strong, stable, united, Conservative majority government.
NDP leader Rachel Notley spoke to her party faithful and says she will stay on as their leader.
We will never stop working to rebuild our public health care, to support the well-being of our communities, to protect our mountains, our pensions, and our kids' education, all while ensuring we have an economy that works for absolutely all Albertans.
In the end, unofficially, the UCP captured 49 seats. The New Democrats, 38 seats, up 14 seats from 2019. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
For more on the Alberta election and the United Conservative Party's majority, we're joined by University of Alberta Political Science Assistant Professor Matthew Wildcat. Wildcat, thank you for joining us today. Let's start with your reaction to last night's provincial election in Alberta and the results. Were there any surprises for you?
There wasn't any major surprises. This is kind of right where the polls said they would be, especially, Janet Brown is a really trusted pollster, and she was almost bang on the mark. I think she said the UCP would win 50 seats, and they're at 49 at the moment. But yeah, no, it's definitely disappointing from the perspective of Indigenous politics. That's my field, and I'm a member of Ermineskin Cree Nation, and, under the previous NDP government led by Rachel Notley, the attempts made at prioritizing Indigenous peoples were significant, and so to not see that government get back in was definitely disappointing.
And earlier this year, it looked like the NDP could win a majority government. In your opinion, what went wrong for them?
It's really hard to say. So in some ways they let it slip away from them, and in other ways, the NDP have come out of almost total obscurity in provincial politics over the last 10 years and are now a sizable and credible opposition and are a legitimate threat to win the next government, right? And their commitment to Indigenous politics, I think you can also see it reflected in the fact that they had 2 very credible Indigenous candidates elected in Edmonton, Jody Calahoo-Stonehouse and Brooks Arkan. They're both really connected to community, Jody to Michelle First Nation and Brooks to Alexander. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful for the future, but the Smith government unfortunately represents such a deviation from what I think should be acceptable politics about how we treat people, like just kind of basic human rights level stuff, that it is really disappointing. And so, I think it's a long road ahead of what these next 4 years are going to be like.
And as you mentioned, there were 2 new Indigenous candidates elected in Edmonton, Jody Calahoo-Stonehouse and Brooks Arkan Paul. For you, how important is it to have Indigenous voices in the Alberta legislature?
It's hard to say what difference it makes in the long run. I really like that there's 2 of them getting elected together. It offers not only just a diversity of perspectives, so that, it's not just one Indigenous person being held on the pedestal, but also that they can support each other, right? That they're in it together. And I think that's really fantastic. At the end of the day, Indigenous, sovereignty and rights emanate from our own political orders. I'm a member of Urban Skin Cree Nation, and I think what it's continuing for our elected officials to continue to interact with provincial elected officials and people who run our organizations to continue to interact with corresponding figures in Canadian society. That is really going to push a lot of change. But at the same point, having Indigenous elected officials, it doesn't hurt.
And finally, what will the next 4 years look like under a UCP majority?
It's really up in the air right now, right? So, if you just some of the recent things that have happened with Danielle Smith, she claimed to be Cherokee, and I don't think she really, she doesn't really push that anymore, but she doesn't really understand why that was so offensive, right? Of this long history of settler governments dictating Indigenous identity and Indigenous citizenship, and this being kind of like part of that continuing tradition of non-Indigenous peoples trying to dictate who Indigenous peoples are. In the fall, she, the Sovereignty Act was an affront to Indigenous peoples, universally condemned by Indigenous leaders. And then she tried to smooth that over by saying Indigenous peoples and settlers tamed a shared frontier in order to build Canada, when not realizing that the frontier was a device used to create a hierarchy between Indigenous peoples and newcomers, and also compared the treatment of Indigenous people or First Nation people under the Indian Act to the treatment Alberta has received from Ottawa, and it was such a stark lack of understanding of how the Indian Act was a tool of assimilation, and really it was a tool of cultural genocide, that to compare those just shows such a profound lack of understanding. And so we're starting at a really low basis, I guess. Maybe the upside is I'm hoping we can only go up from here, but at the same point, it was a disappointing result, and I hope that the Smith government is willing to take some time to learn and to listen, and not just from Indigenous peoples, but frankly from non-Indigenous peoples who I think who I often hear as being kind of equally outraged at some of the things that they're saying. So.
Well, Professor Wellcat, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking some time to talk about this with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to take one more break, but stick around, there's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Spring in Winnipeg, Manitoba brings with it new life. Here, a baby doe gets some much-needed nourishment from mom. Thanks to Ken Young for capturing this legendary moment. We want to see your great springtime photos. Send them to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. On the East Coast, we've got 25 degrees and sunshine in Charlottetown, Fredericton, 31 degrees. Le Grand River, 27 degrees and sunny there. Kuujjuaq, rainy, 8 degrees. Val-d'Or, 32 degrees and sunshine. Chibougamau, 30 degrees and sunny. Peterborough, 31 degrees and sunshine. Sault Ste. Marie, sunny there as well. Kapuskasing, 33 degrees and sunshine. Timmins, rainy and 32. Churchill, 9 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. God's Lake, rainy, 14 degrees. Brandon, rainy at 28 degrees. Barons River, 21. Yorkton, rainy, 27 degrees. North Battleford, 28. Stony Rapids, rainy at 26. Uranium City, cloudy at 23 degrees. Fort McMurray, rainy, 26 degrees. High level, sunshine, 21. Calgary, rainy, 24 degrees. Edmonton, 23. Kamloops, rainy at 25 degrees. Canal, sunshine, 18 degrees. Dease Lake, rainy at 12 degrees. Prince George, sunny and 16. Dawson, rainy at 13 degrees. Old Crow, 15 degrees. Wrigley, sunshine, 19 degrees. Norman Wells, rainy and 16. Inuvik, 19 degrees and rainy. Fort McPherson, 22 degrees. Baker's Lake, 9 degrees and sunshine there. Chesterfield, 4 degrees. Igloolik, -3 and sunny. Clyde River, -3. And before we leave you tonight, a Yukon artist's work recently caught the eye of a famous Indigenous fashion model. Supermodel and activist Kuana Chasing Horse recently sported a pair of earrings on TikTok made by Maria Rose Siki. Siki is a Dene artisan, cultural revitalizer, and owner of Caribou Woman Creations. The earrings were included in a box of goodies that was gifted to Chasing Horse. Made of items like antique Russian blue beads and dentalium shells, the earrings are symbolic of Athabaskan relations, trade, and gifting. Siki says she's excited her work is being noticed by an Indigenous powerhouse.
I really liked having the exposure. I specifically felt more drawn towards, what Kuana stands for, protecting her land and advocating our Indigenous rights. And I felt like for me, it was really liberating to kind of gift something forward to someone who's doing a lot of good work for our Athabaskan relations and our land and, the four-legged and all of creation.
And that's all the time we have for your tonight's edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly. Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Have a great night.